Hey there, my name is Alex, and I am the Silver Mont, and let's talk Dark Souls 3. I was fortunate enough to get into the network test recently, so I've had a little go at the game, and I'm going to attempt to answer your questions and convey my thoughts as best I can. If you have any specific questions that I don't answer in the video, ask them down below and I'll go ahead and try my best to answer them. So a little background information. The network test was on PlayStation 4 and weighed in at around 3 to 4 gigabytes, and as far as I'm aware it was entirely region based. There were 3 region tests, one for Japan, one for America, and one for more or less everywhere else. I fell into the third category, and I imagine most of the people I was playing with were probably also from Europe. Starting up the test, we were restricted to a single zone, the High Wall of Lothric, which was previously known as another name, something like Lodleth. And we had 4 characters available: Wandering Knight, Northern Warrior, Herald of White, and Academy Assassin. Like with previous games and their demos, I do not believe these are actual starting classes, but will probably be equivalent in many ways. In Dark Souls 1, for example, the demo for that game that they showed off at E3 had you playing as Solaire of Astora and Black Knight, and we know that those weren't starting classes. The Wandering Knight was the classic Souls character though. Plate armor, sword and shield. He also started off with a parry shield. The Northern Warrior is more like a bandit. Lighter armor, but a higher damage weapon, the axe. He also starts with a parry shield, but it was more of like a small wooden one as opposed to like a buckler. The Herald of White is essentially a cleric, shield and mace. The shield in question appeared identical to the Dranglake shield, but as we were unable to look at items and their descriptions, it's hard to say. He also had a chime catalyst for casting miracles. Finally, the Academy Assassin was perhaps the most unique of the bunch, a spear and parry shield along with a staff catalyst for magic. And they happen to look rather like a Bloodborne character, but essentially they are a sorcerer. And it appears that from these 2 magic users, the old idea of pairing faith with strength and intelligence with dexterity is very much in play here. My favourite of the bunch was the Northern Warrior, who reminded me of the bandit from Dark Souls, my favourite Dark Souls class. But for my first time through the network test, I went with the first class, the Wandering Knight. And the footage in this video is largely of that first playthrough, hence my ponderous movements. So let's start off with how the game looks and feels. It is very much Dark Souls, in a nutshell. Amongst the Souls games, I think it's fair to say we have 2 styles, Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2. Or to put it another way, every game in the Souls franchise apart from Dark Souls 2 has a very similar feel to it. The way the characters move, the way lighting and animations work, the physics and all that stuff. So if you weren't a fan of Dark Souls 2, which some people feel was too floaty, for example, you're in luck, as this game feels a lot more like Dark Souls. If you were a fan of Dark Souls 2, however, you'll be pleased to know that certain elements from that are retained here. Jumping with the left analog stick, for example. Although you can still change that in options if you want it to be circle or B. Graphically, the game resembles Bloodborne rather strongly. I would guess that it's using the same basic tools and engine. So the blood splashes, lighting, cloth physics and all that, they're very close. Unfortunately, this also means the game is targeting 30 frames per second. Whilst I'm not one to really complain about frame rates, I feel it's important to bring up here for one reason. It is my belief that with Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, the games have become faster, much faster, with combat designed around that faster pace. Bosses are not slow, lumbering beasts like the Asylum Demon anymore. They attack relentlessly, and in general, the games are getting faster and faster. They're getting closer and closer to like Devil May Cry action game territory. And it is my belief that if you are pushing a game that requires faster reaction times and the like, you should be targeting 60 frames per second. It's by no means the end of the world, just an observation. That said, I'll be very curious to see how Dark Souls 3 performs on PC. Because certain elements, such as the Dancer of the Frigid Valley, would be really nice in 60. As far as the actual frame rate and performance goes though, it did feel a little bizarre at times. I didn't really have any great ways of actually measuring the frame rate, but I would say that it dipped to the low 20s quite a lot. I don't think it ever really went really low, like Blight Town low for example. It was never so bad that it hindered my experience, shall we say, but when I started it up, it definitely took a few minutes to get used to. Then again, I imagine by the time the game comes out, they'll have improved the performance. As for glitches, well, I didn't really experience any serious glitches, only some online lag-based shenanigans. So, how does it feel to play? As mentioned, very much like Dark Souls, there's lots of circle strafing, backstabbing and rolling. Enemies are very typical of other Souls games, at least in this one area. Lots of undead soldiers and the like. Some who patrol, wait in ambush, climbing up ledges to jump on your head, all that sort of thing. I didn't see anything that new on that front. Well, there are a few enemies who appear to transform, so I guess that's new, or at least borrowed from Bloodborne. Level design is likewise very dense. The actual area is quite small, but it's packed with side passages, shortcuts and the like. It's the level design most of us love about the franchise. Is the game going to be open world or linear, hub-based? I don't know. I imagine it'll be very much like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. I spent some time exploring the area looking for other zones, you could say, in the distance, and at one point I did spy a large fortress far below the walls of Lothric, and it gave me Sen's Fortress vibes. Maybe once we clear that place we fly up to the walls of Lothric as we did to Anor Londo. It could have just been a background asset, but I doubt that. If you see a large castle fortress looking thing off in the distance in Dark Souls, usually you're going to be going there, so that's my reasoning anyway. As for Lothric itself, I feel the area is probably equivalent to the Undeadburg, or at least the high wall area of the test, in that it's an early game area. Probably. The characters were all around level 8, but I'm not sure how much we can take away from that, considering their stats seem to be tweaked a little for the test. Everyone could fast roll, or to put it another way, nobody could fat roll. Even when you're equipped with a greatsword, 3 weapons and full armor, everyone was fast rolling, so yeah. Now for a list of new or interesting things I noticed whilst playing. Spells now operate under a shared mana bar as opposed to individual charges. Overall, this felt like a slight nerf to magic to me, but we'll have to see how it plays in the final game. Mana can be recovered with the blue Ash Estus flasks, which work just like normal Estus, they're refilled at bonfires and so forth. There's a new spell called Soul Dart. It's very fast and it kind of looks like Soul Arrow, but you can chain it with combos, like you can keep casting it and you will just spam out these tiny little darts. It's fun. Soul Greatsword is back from Dark Souls 2, which is nice because Soul Greatsword was one of the coolest spells that Dark Souls 2 introduced, I think. Although I have to admit, I don't really like how it looks that much in Dark Souls 3. It looks kinda... it doesn't look as cool as it did in Dark Souls 2, in my opinion. Weapon arts. Most, if not all weapons, have a unique attack that costs mana to use, which means mana is useful even if you're a pure melee build, which is really nice. Because in Demon Souls, if you were just a melee user, you didn't really have a use for that mana bar, which isn't really a problem, but it did bug me that it was there and you couldn't use it. I don't like having a resource that I can't use, shall we say. But as for weapon arts, the Greatsword has a really powerful uppercut that has a lot of hyper armor, and the axe has a physical damage buff that lasts for several seconds and is activated with a force-like shout of your character. Miracle catalysts seem to power up the spell you have equipped, and sorcery catalysts appear to charge up your next spell. You can now leave gestures that you play with your messages, so if you're leaving a message like, "Be wary of boss," or something, you can have your character do like a praise the sun gesture. Although maybe praise the sun would work more for if you're leaving a message saying praise the sun or I did it and stuff. Small touch, but really nice, I think. Red eye orbs seem to have made a return. Infinite invasions. Nice. Nobody wants to be limited with stupid cracked eye orbs. There are little grave-like items that you can find throughout the world that, when lit, offer an epitaph with lore flavor text, similar to the lore notes of Bloodborne, but kind of better, if you ask me. No NPCs in the entire zone as far as I could tell. They may have been removed for the test. Likewise, I think some items might have been swapped with generic firebombs or throwing knives for that purpose. Speaking of throwing knives, you can combo them now. Rapid fire knives. Very useful in lots of situations, at least at this point in the game. If their damage doesn't scale, they'll be kinda useless at endgame high level, but hopefully they will scale. It appears you can't parry with all shields. Take the Drang Lake shield for example, the medium shields. You can't parry with them. Parrying itself appears to work like a weapon art, you could say. Doesn't actually cost mana, but it is unique to certain shields, which I think is a good move. Kicking works like Dark Souls 1, although it's slower to activate. So if you had problems doing jumping attacks and guard breaks in Dark Souls 2, like I did, you'll be pleased to know that it's a lot easier to do them now, because you press forward and right trigger, or right bumper, or right 1, or whatever, and it actually works, which is nice. Legion scimitars have the curved sword backflip attack again, which is, I mean, I guess that's good if you like that. They also work like dual wielding when you press Y to two-hand, which is interesting. Seems certain weapons are just kind of automatically power stanced, kind of. Alluring skulls are back. Don't seem to work on the boss in the network test, unfortunately. There are red eye knights, like in Demon Souls. Maybe there'll be blue eye knights too. There are new combo and attack strings with like running R2, charged R2, jumping R2, all that stuff. Charged attacks on that note are pretty damn useful. You can lure enemies into them, much like with Bloodborne, which means there's probably going to be some weapons with distance closing R2s like the rifle spear that we'll probably want to keep an eye on, because those were insanely useful in Bloodborne. Backstabs work like Dark Souls 1, but have slightly smoother animations. You'll still see enemies kind of spinning to be backstabbed, but the actual initiation of the animation looks a lot better now. I don't really know how to describe it other than saying it's a lot smoother. Parrying feels pretty easy to pull off with the parry shields, making them perhaps a more attractive option than the larger shields for players confident in their ability to parry. Overall, I think it's a good idea if only smaller shields can parry. I am curious to see what tower shields will work like though. I think that about covers it. Oh, and if you remember my trailer analysis from a few months ago, I was right in that one area, it is indeed the boss area. In classic Souls style, you can see it as soon as you enter the area. And you gradually make your way down to the boss room. The boss itself is called Dancer of the Frigid Valley, and appears to be pulled or summoned into the boss area through a dark vortex. It moves in, creepy ways, and really feels ethereal. It has a flowing veil that is really nicely animated, and one of the main reasons I want to see the game running at 60 frames per second, because it all just looks so nice. The boss itself feels like something out of Bloodborne. It's very large and gangly, with long limbs and fast combos, and it just kinda looks creepy like a Bloodborne boss. Fortunately though, I didn't find it anywhere near as frustrating as I did with stupid Vicar Amelia in the Dark Beast. I still had some issues with the camera because of the size of the boss, but in general it wasn't nearly as frustrating, which is good. It has a large number of attacks, and it enters a second phase at around half health, wherein it pulls out another sword. Its weapons, as it happens, rather resemble the gold and silver tracers that Lord Blade Kieran used. There is another frigid enemy, I believe. In a hidden optional area you come across a similar silvery knight who moves about on all fours, like all bent over, and he's surrounded by what appears to be corpses or empty suits of armour, and the nearby epitaph claims that he died alone. May his soul find its way back to the Frigid Valley, or something along those lines. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? We have this city, land of Lothric, and then two enemies from a Frigid Valley who appear to be at odds with Lothric. Did their Frigid Valley lose the sun? The fire? Are they invading Lothric to steal their fire? Or do they simply wish to extinguish the flames and spread the cold? Then again, when destroying the dancer, we receive the message, Heir of Fire destroyed, or something along those lines. Needless to say, I'm very curious about Lothric in the Frigid Valley. Maybe we'll be visiting the Frigid Valley. Is it related to Aleum Lois? Probably not. Although the comparisons are there to be made, and very obvious ones at that. And then we have our player character. Are we still undead? Well, there's no humanity, at least not yet. Instead of using humanity at bonfires, we use embers, and we can use them anywhere, like in Dark Souls 2. Our character is always human, no matter how many times they die, or at least that's how it was in the network test. But you can only summon other players after using an ember, which activates Lord of Cinder mode. Your character gains a slight health buff, and can summon others. You also gain a visual effect of embers drifting from your character. It looks interesting. Overall, the game seems to be giving me the feel of a coming cold. Lothric is full of ash, as if the fire has been extinguished. And then there's those giant ash dragon creatures. What was it the narrator said in the opening of Dark Souls 1? Even now, there are only embers. That feels very much true here. I can't wait to find out more about Lothric. Who is the king this time, for starters? What is this black sun we're hearing about? At this point, it's too early to speculate much about the story, but I'm really looking forward to finding out more. Gameplay-wise, it feels solid. It's a lot closer to the first Dark Souls than Dark Souls 2 was, which I know is a complaint many people had. At the same time, it's very close to the first game, so if you're starting to tire of the Souls formula, there doesn't seem to be all that much that's entirely new here. But if you like Dark Souls 2, Demon Souls, Bloodborne and so forth, I think this will probably deliver. As for me, I'm optimistic. Whilst I think Dark Souls 3 is coming too soon, and I think there needs to be more of a gap between entries, I am still eager to jump in. There aren't many games that satisfy my craving for dungeon delving and fantasy adventure, and there's nothing quite like Dark Souls, and the network test was a good sign of what's to come. That said, I'm gonna be mad if the Phoenix Palmer doesn't return. Anyway, if you have any questions that I didn't cover here, ask them down below, and I'll try my best to answer. Of course, remember that it was just one zone, and that's all I know about Dark Souls 3. I don't know anything about other areas or story elements. I don't know if the Dancer of the Frigid Valley is Kieran. She might be, she might not be, probably isn't, but you never know. I'm trying to go into this one as blind as possible, because I think that's the best way to get your souls fix. Goodbye for now, though. You take care.